If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be sitting across from my husband of 25 years, watching him introduce another woman as the love of his life, I would have laughed and told you to stop watching so many soap operas. But life's got a cruel sense of humor. My name is Lorraine Parker, 52 years old, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. I've always believed in three things: hard work, loyalty, and keeping your word. My mama used to say, "A woman's strength ain't in how loud she fights. It's in how calm she stays when the world tries to break her." I didn't truly understand those words until that night. Charles and I were supposed to be celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary. 25 years, half my life spent with the same man. We built a home together, raised 2 kids, and weathered every storm life threw our way. Or so I thought. That morning, I woke up early like I always do, made my coffee, fixed him breakfast. He'd been distant lately, too busy with work, or at least that's what he said. He'd come home smelling of cologne I didn't buy, with that distracted look men get when they've got something or someone else on their mind. Still, I pushed the doubts aside. "Don't go looking for trouble," I told myself. "You're just being paranoid." He kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work. Cold lips, quick, like an obligation. But I clung to hope. I told myself maybe he was planning something special for our anniversary dinner. Maybe the distance was him trying to surprise me, because I was that kind of woman, faithful even when it hurt. By the time evening came, I'd spent an hour choosing my dress. It was the same royal blue one I wore on our 10th anniversary, the one he once said made me look like a queen who forgot how to stop shining. I even wore my pearl earrings, the ones his mother gave me when she told me, "Take care of my son, Lorraine. He's a good man, just a little lost sometimes." If only she knew how lost he'd truly become. The restaurant was one of those dimly lit places where the air hums with quiet money and the waiters speak in soft, practiced tones. The same place Charles had taken me on our first date all those years ago. I sat down first, ordered a glass of Merlot, and waited. He was late. Not unusual, but that night, every minute felt heavier than the last. I kept checking the door, smoothing my dress, telling myself he'd walk in with flowers, or maybe that smile I fell in love with, the one that made me feel like I was the only woman in the room. Instead, when he finally arrived, he looked irritated. His tie was loose, his expression distant, and there wasn't a trace of warmth in his eyes. "Sorry I'm late," he said, brushing past the waiter. Traffic was a mess. No kiss, no compliment. Not even a glance at the dress he once said he loved. I laughed softly, trying to ease the tension. "Well, at least you made it. 25 years, Charles. That's something worth showing up for, don't you think?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, something like that." We ordered dinner. The conversation was polite, surface level. He asked about my catering business, nodded absently while I spoke. I asked about work, and he gave short, clipped answers, eyes flicking to his phone every few seconds. I tried to ignore it, but after the third buzz, my patience thinned. "Is there an emergency I should know about?" I asked, my voice steady. He didn't look up. "Just a work thing. Don't start tonight, Lorraine. Not tonight." The way he said it, "not tonight," made my stomach twist, because I'd heard that tone before. The tone that says, "You're an inconvenience." So I leaned back, forced a smile, and took a slow sip of my wine. I told myself to hold on. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe I was overthinking again. I'd promised myself years ago that I'd never be the kind of woman who picks fights over insecurities. But deep down, something inside me was already unraveling. Halfway through the meal, while I was cutting into my steak, I noticed his phone light up again. I glanced up, and this time I saw it, the reflection of a name across the glass. Danielle. My knife froze mid-cut. I felt the room tilt slightly, my chest tightening as if someone had pressed pause on my heart. He noticed my gaze and flipped the phone over, quick and defensive. "Don't start," he muttered. "It's not what you think." I didn't respond, because I already knew. Men only say it's not what you think when it's exactly what you think. The silence between us stretched thin, humming like a wire about to snap. Then, just when I thought the night couldn't twist the knife any deeper, Charles glanced toward the entrance, straightened his tie, and, God help me, smiled. "Ah," he said softly, "she's here." Before I could ask who, he stood up, waving someone over like he'd been expecting company. And that's when I saw her. A woman, maybe in her early 30s, walking toward us in a red dress that shimmered under the candlelight. She had confidence dripping off her, the kind that only comes when someone believes they've won. Charles turned to me, his hand on the woman's back, and said the words that shattered 25 years of my life in a single breath. "Lorraine, meet Danielle. My real woman. My wife is just for convenience." For a moment, I didn't breathe. The restaurant faded, the clinking glasses, the low jazz music, the chatter, all gone. It was just his voice echoing in my head, sharp and final. But I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even flinch. I just smiled, slow, deliberate, and reached for my purse. If he thought humiliation would break me, he was about to learn what calm destruction looks like. Because when I called the waiter over, I wasn't about to make a scene. I was about to start a war. There are moments in life when silence can cut deeper than any scream. That night, my silence was my blade. The whole restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The waiter froze mid-step. A couple at the next table pretended not to stare, but I caught the way their forks hovered in mid-air. I sat perfectly still, my hand wrapped around the stem of my wine glass, like it was the only thing anchoring me to this earth. Danielle, his real woman, slid into the seat beside him, crossing her legs like she belonged there. She had that fresh, smug glow, like she thought she'd just claimed a trophy, and maybe in her mind she had. I looked at her carefully. She couldn't have been more than 32, skin smooth, hair pressed straight and glossy, nails polished in the same color as her dress, bold, unapologetic red. She smiled at me. Not a friendly smile, no. The kind of smile that says, "I won, and you're too old to fight me for it." Charles cleared his throat as if to fill the heavy air. "I figured it's time for honesty," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You and we've been going through the motions, Lorraine. You know that. The love's been gone for a long time." "The love? Gone?" I almost laughed. Funny how the love disappears right around the time a man finds himself a younger audience. Still, I said nothing. I took a sip of my wine and stared right at him, studying the face of the man I'd built a life with, the man I once believed I'd grow old beside. He looked so sure of himself, so in control. He mistook my calm for weakness. Danielle reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "We didn't want to hurt you," she said softly, feigning sympathy. "But Charles deserves to be happy. You both do." The nerve. This girl sitting at my table touching my husband, wearing that fake compassion like cheap perfume. I set my glass down slowly, the faint click echoing louder than I expected. "Well," I said, my voice calm, measured, "it seems the two of you have a lot to celebrate." Charles smirked, maybe relieved I wasn't making a scene. "Exactly. I knew you'd understand. You've always been practical." I smiled then, a quiet, controlled smile. "Practical," I repeated. "That's one word for it." Inside, though, a fire was rising. Every word, every condescending tone, every arrogant smirk, they were gasoline on a flame I didn't even realize I'd been holding back. But rage, I've learned, is a dangerous thing when it's silent. It doesn't explode. It plans. The waiter returned just then, oblivious to the emotional wreckage playing out before him. "Would you like to order dessert, ma'am?" he asked gently, his eyes flicking nervously between the three of us. "Yes," I said, looking straight at him. "Bring us the dessert sampler and your finest bottle of champagne. Tonight's a celebration." Charles looked startled. "Lorraine, that's not—" But I cut him off with a wave of my hand. "Please, it's our anniversary. Let's toast to new beginnings, shall we?" Danielle blinked, unsure how to respond. "That's very mature of you," she said softly. I turned to her and smiled, warm but sharp. "Oh, honey, I've had a lot of practice being mature." While they whispered to each other, probably gloating over how well I was taking it, I pulled the waiter aside and slipped him a folded napkin. "There's a note inside," I said quietly. "Read it when you're out of sight. Then follow the instructions exactly." He looked confused but nodded. I'd seen that kind of uncertainty before, people sensing they were stepping into something deeper than they understood. As he walked away, Charles sighed and leaned back, looking satisfied. "You're handling this better than I expected, Lorraine." "Oh, Charles," I said softly, "you never did expect enough from me." While the waiter fetched dessert, I studied them, this odd little pair. She laughed too loud, touched his arm too often, trying to prove something. And he, Lord, he looked like a man desperate to feel young again, mistaking her flattery for affection. I remembered how he used to look at me like that, back when we were building our first home, eating ramen and dreaming about success. I remembered the nights I stayed up balancing the books for his business, the times I skipped my own doctor's appointments to make sure he got to his. And here he was, parading his affair like a badge of honor on the very night meant to celebrate our vows. I wanted to cry, to scream, to throw my glass at the wall, but instead I took another sip of wine and decided that if this was the theater he wanted, I'd play my part beautifully. The waiter returned with the champagne and dessert, a platter of rich chocolate cake, crème brûlée, and strawberries dipped in gold-dusted chocolate. Extravagant, expensive, perfect. I raised my glass. "To honesty," I said, my voice smooth as silk. Charles lifted his glass awkwardly. Danielle hesitated, but followed suit. "To new beginnings," she added. We clinked glasses. The sound was sharp, like glass cracking, like something sacred breaking. As I took a sip, I looked straight at Charles and smiled. "Tell me, how long has this new beginning been going on?" He stiffened. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that we're all adults here. We can move on with dignity." "Dignity," I repeated. "Yes, that's exactly what I plan to do." He didn't catch the edge in my voice, but Danielle did. Her smile faltered. Maybe instinct told her something wasn't right. The waiter reappeared, slipping the bill discreetly beside me. I placed my card on top without looking. Charles cleared his throat. "I can handle that." I looked at him and said sweetly, "Oh no, baby, I insist." He leaned back again, smug, confident, convinced he'd just witnessed the most graceful surrender in history. If only he knew what I'd written in that note, because that napkin I gave the waiter, it wasn't just a message, it was a trigger. I'd written, "When I leave this table, charge every item, including the champagne, to the card ending in 4301. If it declines, please inform Mr. Parker politely. Then bring him this envelope." And inside that envelope was something that would wipe that smirk clean off his face. I watched as the waiter slipped into the back, and a strange peace came over me. The calm before the storm, Mama used to call it. And I knew, oh, I knew, that when that waiter came back, the world Charles built on lies was about to start crumbling. I remember the way the waiter's shoes clicked softly against the floor as he disappeared toward the back. Each step felt like a countdown. Steady, deliberate, inevitable. Across from me, Charles leaned back in his chair, completely at ease, tapping his fingers along the stem of his glass. Danielle was still smiling, though the edges of it were starting to tremble, just slightly. Maybe it was the way I looked too calm, too quiet. She didn't know it yet, but that calm was the scariest thing about me. The air in that restaurant was heavy with something unspoken. People were pretending not to look, but curiosity had a smell, sharp and alive, I could feel it wrapping around us. I dabbed my mouth with the napkin and said, "You know, Charles, I spent the last week thinking about this anniversary, about all the memories, the trips, the kids, the dreams we built." He chuckled almost mockingly. "Lorraine, you're being dramatic. We're adults. Things change." I murmured, setting my napkin down. "Things do change. But the way people show their true selves, that never does." He frowned slightly, not understanding, and reached for the champagne bottle. "You're taking this all too personal. I'm trying to be honest. You should appreciate that." "Honest?" I repeated, tilting my head. "Is that what we're calling this?" Danielle cleared her throat, her voice soft but tight. "I know this is hard, Mrs. Parker, but you and Charles can still be friends. You've had your time. It's my turn now." That was the first time she'd spoken my name aloud, Mrs. Parker, the title she was already rehearsing to take for herself. I turned my gaze on her, slow and deliberate. "Sweetheart," I said, my tone wrapped in honey but lined with steel, "you don't have a turn in something you didn't build." She blinked. "Excuse me?" But before I could say another word, the waiter returned. He wasn't smiling. "Ma'am," he said quietly, leaning toward me, "as you requested." He slipped a folded piece of paper beside my plate, his hand trembling slightly. I could see a hint of confusion in his eyes, maybe even pity. I nodded once. "Thank you." Charles frowned. "What's that?" "Just a little something I arranged for us," I said. The waiter stood tall now, clearing his throat. His voice, polite but firm, carried farther than he intended. "Sir, I'm afraid your card has been declined." The sound of forks pausing mid-air rippled across nearby tables. Charles blinked, stunned. "What?" The waiter continued calmly. "We attempted to charge the bill to the account ending in 4301, but it was declined. Would you like to try another form of payment?" Danielle's head whipped toward him. "That's your business card, right?" Charles' face darkened. "That's impossible. Run it again." The waiter nodded, walked back toward the register, and left behind a silence so thick you could hear the jazz music falter for a beat. I didn't say a word. I just sipped my champagne and watched. He turned to me, his voice low, defensive. "What did you do, Lorraine?" I smiled faintly. "Nothing you didn't earn." The waiter returned a minute later, polite but visibly nervous. "I'm sorry, sir. The card has been declined again. Would you like to use another?" Charles was flushed now, pulling out his wallet, fumbling through his cards. I could see the panic begin to bloom in his eyes, that wild glint men get when they realize control is slipping away. He slid another card across the table. "Try this one." The waiter took it and walked away again. Danielle leaned close to him, whispering, "What's going on?" He hissed back, "I don't know." That was the first crack in their perfect little act. I leaned back, calm as ever. "You know, Charles," I said softly, "I remember the day we opened that account. You said, 'This one's for emergencies.' Funny how emergencies come when you least expect them." He snapped his head toward me, suspicion cutting through the panic. "I didn't what?" I asked innocently. "Do something. I'm just sitting here enjoying dessert." The waiter returned again, but this time he wasn't alone. He was holding a small envelope. He set it down in front of Charles with practiced politeness. "Sir, the lady asked me to deliver this if there were any issues." Charles froze. His fingers hovered above it like the paper might burn him. "Go on," I said, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "It's for you." He tore the envelope open. His eyes darted back and forth as he read, and I watched his face crumble. Confusion first, then realization, then pure, undiluted dread. The color drained from his cheeks. "You," he began, voice shaking. "You froze the accounts?" "Correction," I said evenly. "I froze my accounts, the ones you've been funneling money from into that little boutique of hers." Danielle's eyes widened. "What?" He turned to her, panic flashing across. His face. "It's not what you think." But she was already pushing her chair back. "You told me you were divorced. You said you were separating, that everything was settled." I stood slowly, gathering my purse. "Oh, he's been settling, all right. Just not legally." Charles slammed his hand against the table. "Lorraine, sit down." The room fell utterly silent. All eyes were on us now. A man unraveling, a mistress humiliated, and me, the calm in the middle of the chaos I had orchestrated. I leaned down just enough so only he could hear me. My voice was low, steady. "You brought her to our anniversary dinner to humiliate me. You thought I'd cry or beg or run out of here ashamed." His jaw clenched. "What do you want?" I smiled, the kind of smile that made him flinch. "I want you to pay the bill, Charles. Every last cent. Because tonight, the only thing that's declined is your dignity." I turned to the waiter, my tone gentle again. "Would you please split the bill? I'll cover what's mine, and he'll handle the rest." The waiter nodded quickly, grateful to retreat from the battlefield. As I walked toward the door, the weight of 25 years lifted from my shoulders. Behind me, I could hear Charles arguing with Danielle, his voice sharp, desperate. The clinking of silverware, the whispers of strangers, all fading into a dull hum. When I stepped outside, the night air hit me like freedom. The city lights blurred through tears I didn't bother to wipe away. They weren't from pain anymore. They were from release. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just Charles Parker's wife. I was Lorraine. And this was only the beginning. I didn't go home that night. I drove until the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red through the windshield. Somewhere between anger and disbelief, I pulled over at an all-night diner off the highway, the kind with flickering neon lights and waitresses who've seen too much to be surprised by anything. I sat there for hours, staring at my untouched cup of coffee, wondering how I'd gotten here. 25 years of marriage. And it all came crashing down between dessert and a declined credit card. But betrayal never happens all at once. It builds, quiet and patient, in the cracks you choose to ignore. And Lord knows, I ignored plenty. I met Charles when I was 26. Back then, he was this charming, ambitious man with a laugh that could light up a room. I was working 2 jobs, mornings at a bakery, evenings at a catering company, saving every dollar to start my own business. He'd come into the bakery every Thursday morning for the same thing, black coffee and a blueberry muffin. He'd sit at the counter, flirt a little, talk about his dreams, building a company, making something of himself. I liked that about him. He had fire, drive. And I thought, maybe that's what I need. Someone who believes as hard as I do. When we got married, we didn't have much. We lived in a small apartment with thin walls and secondhand furniture. But we had each other, and back then, that felt like everything. He'd stay up late working on business plans. I'd stay up later making sure there was food ready for him when he finally went to bed. We grew together, or at least I thought we did. When his first promotion came, I celebrated like it was my own. I ironed his shirts, packed his lunches, sat in the audience at his company dinners, smiling beside him like the perfect wife. And when I started my catering business, he was proud, at least at first. But the more successful I became, the more distant he got. He'd make jokes about how I was too independent or how a man likes to feel needed. I laughed them off because that's what women like me were taught to do. Smooth the edges, make things easier, keep the peace. I can still remember the first time he lied to me. It was 10 years ago. He said he was going on a business trip to Miami, but a week later, I found a credit card charge for a hotel in Savannah, just 2 hours away. When I confronted him, he told me I was paranoid. He said, "You're imagining things, Lorraine. Don't ruin what we've built over nonsense." And I believed him, because I wanted to. Because the alternative, that the man I loved was betraying me, was too painful to face. I learned to silence the voice in my head that whispered, "Something isn't right." I buried myself in work, in our kids, in being the woman who holds everything together. But silence doesn't erase the truth. It just delays the explosion. The years that followed looked perfect from the outside. We bought a house in Brookhaven, took trips to the coast, threw parties for his colleagues. He loved showing me off. My beautiful wife, the businesswoman. But behind closed doors, he'd go cold. He'd come home late smelling like expensive cologne and cheap apologies. I'd ask him simple questions. Where were you? Why didn't you call? And he'd twist them into accusations. You don't trust me? After everything I've done for you? That's the trick, you see. A man like Charles doesn't just cheat with his body. He cheats with your mind. He makes you doubt your own instincts until you start apologizing for even having them. So I stopped asking questions. I poured myself into my catering business, expanded to 2 new locations, started hiring other women, single mothers, older women trying to rebuild their lives. Helping them helped me. It reminded me who I was before him. But every time I walked through our house, every picture frame, every carefully folded shirt, every "I love you" text sent out of habit, it all felt like I was living in a museum of lies. And deep down, I knew it wouldn't last. That one day, the truth would claw its way to the surface. That day came when I got a call I wasn't supposed to get. It was 3 weeks before our anniversary. I was at my bakery when my phone rang, an unknown number. Normally, I don't answer those, but something in me said to pick up. A woman's voice came through, quiet but trembling. "Mrs. Parker?" she asked. "Does he still wear that gold ring you bought him, the one with the engraving inside?" My stomach dropped. "Who is this?" She hesitated. "You don't know me, but you should. My name's Monica. I used to work with your husband, until I realized he had a wife." I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My throat closed up. "He told me you two were separated," she continued. "I found out the truth a month ago and ended it. But I thought you should know. He's been seeing another woman now. Someone new, younger. She thinks she's the only one." My world tilted. All I could hear was the sound of my heart pounding, heavy and hollow. When I hung up, I sat there for a long time staring at the wall. That's when the numbness turned into something sharper, not sadness, not even anger, determination. Because that was the moment I decided that if Charles wanted to play games, he'd finally met his match. The next few weeks, I didn't confront him. I watched. I listened. I checked his email, his phone, his business accounts, things I'd never done before. And what I found made my blood run cold. He'd opened a new bank account under both his name and someone else's. Danielle Carter. The same name that flashed on his phone at dinner. He was using my business funds to pay for her boutique, transfers disguised as investments. So I started planning, not out of revenge, but out of necessity, because I'd given him 25 years of my life. My loyalty, my sacrifices, my forgiveness. He'd taken it all for granted. Now, I was going to take back something for myself. And that dinner? That was just the beginning of the end. When I look back on that night, what sticks with me most isn't the betrayal, it's the smile. That perfectly polished, picture-ready smile that Danielle wore like a weapon. I'd seen it before on other women, young, ambitious, the kind who think they've found a shortcut through life by latching on to a man who's already climbed the ladder. But that night, sitting across from her, I realized something deeper. She wasn't just proud. She was performing, for me. She wanted me to see it, to see her nails tracing circles on Charles's wrist, to hear her giggle every time he whispered some tired old line I'd probably heard a dozen times in my marriage. It was theater for her. She was the star, and I was the audience of one. And I played my part perfectly, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you never interrupt a fool when they're putting on a show. You just Let them finish the act, and then you take the stage. Charles was still fumbling through his wallet after the waiter had returned the second declined card. He was sweating, flustered, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Lorraine, this is ridiculous. You didn't have to embarrass me like this." I tilted my head, my tone honey-sweet. "Embarrass you? Oh, baby, I'm not the one who brought their side piece to their anniversary dinner. You manage that part all on your own." Danielle flinched but recovered quickly. "You don't have to talk to him like that. He's just trying to be honest with you." I gave her a long, steady look. "Honesty? Honey, that man couldn't spell it if you spotted him the vowels." The waiter stood nearby, pretending to refill water glasses while his eyes darted between us. A few tables over, a woman whispered to her husband, "That's her." His wife. The word wife hit the air like thunder. Charles ran a hand over his face. "Can we just go, please?" But I wasn't done. Not yet. "No, Charles," I said, standing slowly. "We can't just go, because I've spent half my life cleaning up your messes, forgiving your mistakes, and pretending you were still the man I married. But this—" I gestured around the table. "This one's all yours. I want everyone here to see exactly who you really are." The color drained from his face. "Lorraine, sit down." Danielle shot to her feet. "You're being dramatic. This isn't healthy for any of us." I turned toward her, my voice lowering to a tone that made her blink. "You think you've won something here, don't you? You think sitting in my seat makes you me. But let me tell you something, sweetheart. Men like him will promise you the world and hand you ashes." She blinked, trying to hold her composure. "He loves me." I said softly. "That's what I thought too. Until I realized love doesn't hide in hotel rooms or steal from joint accounts." The waiter returned again, holding a small black folder. His face was pale, but his professionalism never wavered. "Sir," he said carefully, "we tried all available cards. None were approved." A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Danielle gasped. "What do you mean none were approved?" I reached into my purse and took out a crisp $100 bill, handing it to the waiter. "Here, sweetheart. This should cover my part, and your tip. You've been wonderful tonight." The waiter nodded gratefully and took the cash. "Thank you, ma'am." Then, right on cue, I turned back to Charles. "Looks like you'll have to wash some dishes, Mr. Parker. It's fitting, considering you've been making a mess for years." The waiter's eyes widened slightly, but I winked at him. "Don't worry, he's good at cleaning up when he's cornered." Charles stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is absurd. You can't just—" "Can't. I asked quietly. "Charles, every credit card you've been using is attached to accounts I helped build. You think I didn't notice when the transfers started disappearing into that boutique?" Danielle's head snapped toward him. "What boutique?" Charles froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "You didn't tell her?" I said. "Oh, that's rich." I turned to Danielle. "He told me it was a consulting investment. You know, helping a young entrepreneur start her dream business. I guess he forgot to mention he was sleeping with the CEO." Her face turned crimson. You're lying." I smiled, pulling a folded paper from my purse and sliding it across the table. "You can read it yourself. Bank statements, withdrawals, even a little transfer labeled gift. Anniversary. Funny thing, though. It went to your name, not mine." She snatched the paper, skimmed it, and her face went white. "You told me she knew," she hissed at him. "You said it was over. Danielle, please." But she was already grabbing her purse, shaking her head. "You're broke, Charles. You're a damn liar." She stormed off, heels clicking like gunfire. For a moment, it was just him and me again. The same man who once promised me forever, now standing there small and lost, surrounded by the whispers of strangers. "You didn't have to do this," he muttered, defeated. "Oh yes," I said softly. "I did. Because you thought you could humiliate me and I wanted you to understand something." I leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. I'm not the fool you married. I'm the woman you created." He didn't speak. He couldn't. I picked up my purse and turned toward the door. The waiter caught my eye again and gave me a small, knowing nod. I smiled back quietly. Outside, the night air was crisp and alive. I stood under the restaurant's golden lights, breathing it all in. The sound of the city, the faint hum of traffic, the feeling of a weight lifting off my chest. Inside, Charles was left with a table full of unpaid bills, an empty chair, and a story he'd never lived down. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer friend, Camille. "Everything's set. You ready to make it official?" I typed back one word, yes. Because now that the mistress had smiled, the husband had fallen, and the lies had burned away, it was time for Act 2. And Act 2 was mine. Charles probably thought that dinner was my breaking point. He had no idea it was my proof of concept. See, what he didn't know, what no one in that restaurant could have guessed, was that I'd already rehearsed that entire night in my mind. The confrontation, the calm tone, the way I'd hand that napkin to the waiter like it was just another polite favor. It wasn't improvisation, it was execution. Because weeks before that dinner, I already knew everything. It started with that phone call from Monica, the former colleague. After we hung up, I spent the next few hours sitting in my car, engine off, staring at nothing. My first instinct was to confront him, demand the truth, tear through his excuses until I found the bones of it. But instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I thought like the woman I used to be before I met him. The woman who built something from scratch. The one who didn't cry when life punched her in the gut. She got quiet, rolled up her sleeves, and found a way to win. I went home that night, kissed him on the cheek like nothing was wrong, and when he fell asleep, I picked up his phone. He'd always been cautious, always kept it locked. But that night, he forgot. The first thing I saw was a message from Danielle. "I booked the table for our anniversary dinner, baby. Can't wait to meet her face to face. You deserve to live your truth." My breath caught. Meet her face to face. That was me, his wife. And that's when the plan started forming. I spent the next 3 weeks quietly setting the board. First, the finances. I logged into our shared accounts under the pretense of paying bills. What I saw made my stomach turn. Transfers to accounts under his name. And another I didn't recognize. D. Carter. A quick search through my catering company's outgoing transactions confirmed my suspicion. He'd been moving small amounts out of my business fund. Not enough to trigger alarms, but steady and deliberate. 5,000 here, 7,000 there, each one labeled as supplier payment or equipment costs. He thought he was clever. He didn't realize the only reason he could play financial chess was because I taught him how to move the pieces. So I called my lawyer friend, Camille, sharp as a blade, discreet as a whisper. We met over coffee that weekend. I slid the bank statements across the table. She scanned them quickly and nodded. "He's siphoning funds, all right. You could press charges for embezzlement if you wanted." I didn't want to. Not yet. What I wanted was leverage. So Camille helped me open a new business account, one that only I controlled, and rerouted all major payments there. Then we quietly froze the joint accounts and prepared documents to separate personal assets from company ones. "Move fast," she warned. "If he catches wind of this—" "Oh, he won't," I said, sipping my coffee. "He's too busy playing house." The next part was trickier. Information. I needed to know everything about this woman, the mistress who thought she'd earned my life. Danielle Carter, boutique owner, 32, Instagram full of soft filters and motivational quotes about manifesting your destiny. I scrolled through her pictures one night and I swear I could taste the arrogance. There she was in Paris, holding a glass of wine with the caption, "Building my empire." Another photo, in a red dress I'd seen before, captioned, "He calls me his piece." His piece. That was my breaking point. Because all those years I'd been his anchor, holding steady when he fell apart. And now he was giving my title away like it was a consolation prize. But instead of anger, what came next was precision. I started tracking his movements. Nothing dramatic, no GPS, no private investigator, just old-fashioned intuition and pattern recognition. I knew what time he left for work, when he worked late, what nights he took the long way home. And sure enough, every Wednesday and Friday, he was in Buckhead, right near her boutique. So I drove there one afternoon, parked across the street, watched him walk inside carrying flowers. I sat there for an hour, not crying, not shaking, just watching. Because sometimes the best revenge doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from observation, from seeing the full picture before you paint your move. When he came home that night, he kissed me like nothing had changed, and I smiled back like everything had. I started documenting every deposit, every message, every receipt. I even found an email thread where he promised Danielle he'd handle the divorce quietly after the anniversary. He wrote, "Lorraine won't make a fuss. She's too dignified for drama." He was right about one thing. I wasn't going to make a fuss, but I was absolutely going to make history. So I planned the dinner. I played along when he suggested that restaurant, the one where we had our first date. The irony was almost poetic. I let him believe I was still in the dark. I even pretended to forget the reservation he made under her name, though I already had the confirmation forwarded to my email. That morning, I made one final move. I transferred the last of our shared funds into my new account. Then I canceled every credit card attached to his name. By the time he picked her up that evening, he didn't even realize his entire financial world was already collapsing beneath him. And when I sat at that table, calm, collected, smiling through his cruelty, it wasn't weakness. It was the satisfaction of a woman who'd already won before the first word was spoken. That's what people never understand about revenge. It's not about shouting or breaking things. It's about patience, about letting the other person dig their own grave while you quietly choose the flowers. So when that waiter came back to tell him his card was declined, when I saw the flicker of panic cross his face, it wasn't surprise I felt. It was justice. But justice, I knew, was only the beginning. The real work, the beautiful part, was yet to come. There's a certain kind of silence that follows a man's downfall, not the kind that's peaceful, but the kind that hums with disbelief, like the whole world is trying to process what just happened. That's the silence that settled over the restaurant when the waiter announced Charles's card had declined. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every clink of a glass, all of it wrapped around him like judgment. He sat there pale and stiff, his pride slipping off him like sweat under those warm chandelier lights. And me? I just smiled. I lifted my champagne glass, the bubbles still dancing inside. "To truth," I said softly, raising it toward him. "You finally wanted honesty, Charles. Let's toast to it." He didn't lift his glass. His hand just hovered near it, shaking slightly. "What the hell is this, Lorraine?" he hissed. "What are you trying to prove?" I took a sip. "Nothing," I said, calm and measured. "I'm done proving. I'm just letting the truth breathe." The waiter was still standing nearby, unsure whether to back away or stay. I caught his eye and nodded gently. "Thank you," I said. "You've been wonderful tonight. Please make sure Mr. Parker handles the payment. He has plenty of assets." Charles's jaw tightened. "You think this is funny?" I leaned in, close enough that only he could hear me. "No," I whispered. "I think it's fair." Danielle sat frozen beside him, eyes darting around as the stares multiplied. Her flawless posture was cracking. Her voice, when she finally spoke, trembled. "Charles, do something." He snapped. "I'm trying." He yanked his wallet open again, fumbling for another card. His hands were shaking so bad he dropped one, and it clattered to the floor. I watched it slide across the polished wood, that shiny little piece of plastic that symbolized everything he thought made him powerful. It stopped by my shoe. I looked at it, then at him. "Funny," I said, picking it up between two fingers. "I remember signing for this one too." And I snapped it in half. The room went dead quiet. Danielle gasped. "You can't do that." "Oh, honey," I said softly, "I already did." I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress, and reached for my purse. My movements were steady, deliberate, the kind of grace that comes when you've finally stopped being afraid. Charles stood too, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "You'll regret this, Lorraine. You're humiliating yourself." I turned toward him, met his eyes, and said evenly, "No, Charles, I'm freeing myself. The humiliation was staying married to a man who mistook silence for weakness." He opened his mouth to respond, but I raised a hand. "Don't bother. You've talked enough for both of us." Then I turned to Danielle. "And you, let me give you a little advice from one woman to another. If a man will cheat with you, he will cheat on you. You just haven't earned your turn yet." Her face twisted, anger replacing embarrassment. "You're just bitter." I smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart, I'm better." The waiter returned one final time, holding a folded piece of paper, the note I'd given him earlier, now fulfilled. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "everything has been arranged as you asked." "Perfect," I said, sliding a crisp tip into his hand. "You handled this beautifully." He nodded, glancing between us, then walked away with that subtle mix of confusion and admiration I'd seen before. The look people give when they're not sure whether they've witnessed revenge or art. As I turned to leave, Charles grabbed my arm. His grip wasn't rough, just desperate. "Don't walk away like this," he said, voice cracking. "We can talk. We can fix it." I looked down at his hand, then back at him. "You don't fix what you shattered, Charles. You leave it where it fell and learn to live with the pieces." I gently pulled free, and this time, he didn't try to stop me. Outside, the night air hit me like a baptism, cool, clean, alive. The city lights shimmered on the hood of my car as I stood there for a moment, breathing it in. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. Not happy, not exactly, but free. Then my phone buzzed, a text from Camille. "Divorce papers ready. Want me to file in the morning?" I stared at the screen, thumb hovering for just a second before typing back, "File it now." Because I didn't need another night to think about it. Charles had already written the ending. I was just signing the final page. As I got in my car, I glanced through the restaurant window one last time. Charles was still sitting there, head in his hands, the mistress gone, the waiter standing by awkwardly with the unpaid bill. I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered every night he came home late. Every time he looked at his phone and smiled when he thought I wasn't watching. Every lie he dressed up as honesty. And the pity vanished. I started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot, and let the city swallow the rest of the noise. I wasn't Lorraine the wife anymore. I wasn't Mrs. Parker. I was a woman reborn from betrayal, calm, focused, and ready to take back everything he'd stolen, piece by piece. He wanted a real woman. Now he was about to meet one. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. The house looked different that night. Not physically. The porch light still glowed, the azalea bushes still lined the walkway. But the air around it had changed. It no longer felt like home. It felt like evidence. I sat in the car for a long time, watching my own reflection in the rearview mirror. My lipstick had faded, and there were faint smudges under my eyes. But the woman staring back at me wasn't broken. She was done pretending. When I finally walked inside, the quiet felt heavier than it should have. The smell of his cologne still lingered in the hallway, that expensive, woody scent he'd started wearing a few months ago. I used to love that smell. Now it made me want to open every window and let the night air wash it away. I went straight to the kitchen, kicked off my heels, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. Too steady. The kind of calm that only comes after a storm. Then I opened the drawer next to the fridge, the one where I'd hidden the envelope Camille had prepared, divorce papers, filed, process started. It's funny how a single signature can end 25 years of history. I placed the papers on the counter and rested my hand on them. For a second, I thought about tearing them up, pretending the dinner hadn't happened, pretending there was still something to save. But then my phone buzzed. A text from Camille. Filed confirmation sent to your email. You're officially done, honey. I exhaled slowly. A weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying lifted right then. Not the weight of Charles, but the weight of forgiveness. Because forgiveness, I learned, isn't something you owe someone who burned your peace. Sometimes forgiveness is just saying, I'm finished trying. The sound of tires crunching on the driveway broke the silence. Headlights flashed through the curtains. I didn't even have to look to know it was him. The key turned in the lock. His old habit of announcing himself before walking in. Only this time the door didn't budge. He rattled it once, twice, then knocked. Lorraine! Bang, bang, open the door! I stayed where I was, leaning against the counter, sipping my water. Lorraine, come on, this is childish, he said, his voice muffled through the wood. I almost laughed. Childish? The man who brought his mistress to our anniversary dinner was calling me childish. I waited until his knocking grew impatient. Then I walked to the door and said quietly, You don't live here anymore, Charles. What? His voice cracked. Lorraine, open the damn door. I smiled, not that he could see it. You'll get the notice tomorrow. Consider this a head start. He banged harder. You froze my accounts. Do you know what you've done? I do, I said. I paid the bill. He stopped. Silence. Then, more softly, Please, let's talk. But there was nothing left to say. I turned and walked away, letting the sound of his fists fade behind me. The door was locked, but so was my heart. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Old habits die hard. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the sky turn from black to gold. The house felt different now. Lighter, cleaner, mine. When my phone rang, I expected Camille again. Instead, it was a text from one of my employees at the catering business. Ms. Lorraine, Mr. Parker called the office asking about the company accounts. Should we tell him anything? I smiled into my coffee. Tell him the owner will be in touch if needed. Because that was the part he never understood. The business was mine. He might have signed a few papers or posed for a few photos at fundraisers, but the sweat, the vision, the sleepless nights, those were mine alone. And now, without access to the funds he siphoned, he'd have to face the same thing I did years ago, the consequences of his own choices. By noon, I was at my bakery, apron-tied, hands deep in dough. My staff looked surprised to see me. Miss Lorraine, we thought you were taking the day off for your anniversary, one of the girls said carefully. I smiled. I celebrated enough last night. The laughter that followed wasn't forced. It was real. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been locked away for years. For the first time, I wasn't pretending to be okay. I was okay. While I worked, my phone buzzed again. Camille, this time. You might want to check the news. My stomach tightened. I wiped my hands and opened the link she'd sent. Local business executive under internal review for misuse of corporate funds. His name, bold and clear, Charles Parker. I almost dropped the phone. Apparently, his company had been investigating unexplained withdrawals from an expense account. funds that conveniently matched the ones he'd been funneling into Danielle's boutique. I didn't even have to lift a finger. Karma was faster than I thought. That evening, he tried calling again. 5 missed calls, then 1 voicemail. "Lorraine, they suspended me. I don't know how they found out, but I swear I'll fix this. Please call me back." I played it once, then deleted it. Some debts, I thought, can't be repaid with words. That night, I sat on the back porch, a soft breeze rolling through the magnolias. I poured myself a glass of wine and let the quiet stretch. For the first time in years, there was no tension in my shoulders, no waiting for footsteps, no checking the clock. The stars were sharp and bright above me. I whispered to the dark, "You wanted a real woman, Charles. Well, she's finally here." And somewhere out there, I hoped he could feel it. That cold ripple of knowing he'd underestimated the wrong kind of woman. Because the dinner might have been the explosion, but what came next? That would be the ruin. 3 days after the dinner, I was at my bakery kneading dough, letting the rhythm of it settle my thoughts. It was funny how peace could come from something as simple as flour and patience. I didn't even realize how much I missed feeling steady until that morning. No waiting for his car in the driveway, no pretending not to smell perfume that wasn't mine, just quiet, warm ovens, and me. Then the door swung open so hard the little bell above it let out a shriek. The girls behind the counter froze. I looked up, wiping my hands on my apron, and there she was, Danielle. She wasn't smiling this time. No red dress, no perfect hair. Her makeup was smudged, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. The confidence she'd worn at that restaurant like perfume had evaporated. "You ruined everything," she said, her voice shaking. I stayed still, quiet. "You'll have to be more specific, darling. I've been quite busy." "You froze the accounts. The boutique, my boutique, is gone." She slammed her hand on the counter. "Do you know what that did to me?" I looked at her, calm as a Sunday morning. "You mean the boutique my ex-husband, was illegally funding with my business money?" Her jaw clenched. "He told me it was an investment." I nodded slowly. "Oh, I'm sure he did. Charles has always been good at repackaging lies as opportunities." The bakery had gone still. My girls were standing back, wide-eyed, pretending to clean trays but listening to every word. Danielle's voice rose. "He's broke now. They fired him. And you made me look like a fool." I took off my apron, folded it neatly, and walked around the counter until I was standing right in front of her. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "you didn't need my help for that." She blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" "You walked into a marriage that wasn't yours, played wife to a man who couldn't even pay for dinner, and called me a fool? No, baby. You volunteered for humiliation. I just handed you the receipt." For a moment, I thought she might cry, but then her expression hardened. "You think you've won? You're pathetic, bitter, alone. At least he loved me." That one almost made me laugh. Almost. "Love?" I repeated. "That man doesn't love anyone he can't control. I should know. I spent half my life mistaking control for affection." I leaned closer, just enough for her to see I meant every word. "You want advice? Don't ever confuse a man's attention for devotion. Attention fades, devotion builds." Her eyes filled with tears, but her pride wouldn't let them fall. "You don't scare me." I smiled, slow and sure. "Oh, I'm not trying to scare you. You're already living the part that frightened me for years, waking up next to someone who drains the life right out of you." Just then, Camille walked in. She froze for half a second, then raised an eyebrow. Well, this must be the infamous boutique owner." Danielle turned to her. "Who are you?" Camille smiled, sharp and smooth. "I'm her attorney, which means this conversation is now officially over." Danielle's mouth opened, then closed. She looked from me to Camille, realizing she was outnumbered. I crossed my arms. "You should go, Danielle. You've done enough damage for one lifetime." Her lip quivered, anger twisting with regret. "He said you were cold, controlling, that you made him feel small." I met her eyes. "And yet, here you are, trying to crawl out of the hole he dug for you." She didn't have a comeback. She just stood there for a long, trembling moment, then turned and walked out. The bell over the door jingled one last time. Camille watched her go, then looked back at me. "You handled that with grace. I'd have thrown flour in her face." I laughed softly. "Oh, I thought about it." She smirked. "You're trending, by the way." That caught me off guard. Trending? Camille took out her phone and showed me a video already making rounds online. It was security footage from the bakery, Danielle's little meltdown captured perfectly on camera. "Someone from your staff uploaded it," Camille said. "People are calling you the Queen of Calm." I stared at the screen, watching myself in the video, steady, composed, unshaken. The comments scrolled faster than I could read them. "This woman is legendary." She didn't even raise her voice. Iconic. That mistress picked the wrong wife. For the first time, I smiled without sadness behind it. "Let them talk," I said quietly. "Maybe someone out there needs to see what quiet strength looks like." That night, I sat on my porch again, sipping tea instead of wine. The air smelled like rain and magnolia. My phone buzzed nonstop. News outlets asking for interviews, women's forums sharing my story. I ignored them all except for one message from an older woman named Mrs. Hughes, a retired teacher who used to come to my bakery every Sunday. "I watched that video, baby. You made me proud. I left a man like that 30 years ago and still never got the chance to tell my story, but you did it for all of us." I read that message 3 times before replying, "Thank you. Maybe it's time our stories stopped being secrets." Because that's when I realized something bigger than revenge had started. It wasn't just about Charles anymore. It was about every woman who'd ever been told to stay quiet, to take it, to smile through betrayal. They thought my story ended with humiliation, but it was only beginning to rise, with witnesses. 2 weeks after the dinner, the cracks in Charles's life had widened into full-blown sinkholes. I didn't have to lift a finger. His lies were collapsing under their own weight. It started with a whisper. One of his co-workers, a woman named Angela who used to order from my catering company, texted me late one night. "Girl, your husband's name is all over the office. Something about misusing corporate funds. He's in deep." I stared at the message for a long time, my tea growing cold. Then I smiled. See, Charles's downfall wasn't revenge. It was math. You can't live on borrowed honesty forever. The numbers always balance out eventually. By the end of that week, his company had launched a formal audit. The same account he used to fund Danielle's boutique? Turns out he'd been mixing corporate and personal expenses for months. Luxury dinners, travel, consulting fees, all traced right back to him. I found out through a friend on LinkedIn of all places. She messaged me a link to a breaking article, Executive Suspended Pending Investigation for Financial Misconduct. There was no photo, but everyone in our circle knew who it was. That night, I poured myself a glass of red wine and read the article twice. Every line felt like a small exhale, years of swallowed frustration finally released into the air. And while Charles's name was sinking, mine was rising. The viral video from the bakery had done more than just entertain people. It started a conversation. Women, especially older women, were flooding my inbox with messages. They weren't laughing. They were relating. Messages like, "You handled that like a queen. I've been that woman before. Thank you for showing how grace can still sting. You gave me courage to leave mine." I didn't post for attention, but sometimes the truth finds its own spotlight. Within a week, a local journalist reached out asking to feature me for a piece on women entrepreneurs and resilience. "Your story is powerful, Ms. Parker," she said over the phone. "It's not about revenge, it's about reclamation." I liked that word, reclamation. That's what I'd been doing all along, taking back pieces of myself I'd lost, trying to make a man feel whole. Meanwhile, Charles was unraveling. Camille forwarded me an update from his company's HR department. He was officially suspended without pay, his company car repossessed, his corporate card terminated. I almost felt bad, almost. But then I remembered the look on his face at that dinner, the arrogance, the smirk, the certainty that I'd never fight back, and any pity that tried to creep in died right there. A few days later, he showed up again. Not at the house, he knew better than that, but at the bakery, the same place where Danielle had made her grand, disastrous entrance. I was in the back prepping orders when my assistant whispered, "Ms. Lorraine, there's a man out front asking for you. Looks like trouble." When I stepped into the front, there he was, Charles Parker, once polished and proud, now disheveled, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled button-down and eyes heavy with sleepless nights. The room went quiet. My staff froze. "Lorraine," he said, voice low, almost pleading. "Can we talk?" I folded my arms. "About what, Charles? The anniversary dinner, the mistress, or the missing money?" He winced. "Please, not here." "I think here's fine," I said, my tone even. "It's where you seem to do your best confessions." He sighed. "You made your point, okay? I messed up. I got caught. Up trying to feel young again. Trying to escape. I don't know what. But you've made your point." I shook my head slowly. "No, Charles. Life made the point. I just let it speak." He rubbed a hand across his face. "They fired me. I've got nothing, Lorraine. Nothing." For a brief second, I saw the man I used to know, the one who once held me through hard nights, who swore we'd grow old together. But then, I remembered every tear I cried alone while he was working late. "That's not true," I said softly. "You still have yourself, if you can live with that." He looked up, eyes wet. "You don't have to be cruel." "I'm not," I said. "Cruelty was you humiliating me in public. This," I gestured around the bakery, "this is consequence." He swallowed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I loved you, Lorraine." I met his gaze steadily. "Then you should have acted like it." Before he could respond, Camille appeared from the back, my guardian angel in heels. She held a folder in her hand. "Mr. Parker," she said crisply, "you're trespassing on private property, and before you start, yes, I've already filed for full separation of assets. The court date's in 2 weeks. Charles's eyes darted between us. "So that's it?" "That's it," I said simply. "Go start your new life, the one you threw this one away for." He hesitated, like he wanted to say more, but then his shoulders sagged. He turned and walked out slowly, the doorbell chiming behind him like a curtain closing. Camille watched him leave, then turned to me. "You okay?" I nodded. More than okay. That evening, I watched the sunset from my porch again, the same view I'd seen for decades, but everything looked different now. Lighter, open, mine. The next morning, I woke to an email from that same journalist who'd called earlier. "We'd love to feature your story as part of our Women Who Rebuilt series. The public response has been overwhelming. Would you agree to an interview?" I stared at it for a long moment before replying. "Yes, but I don't want to talk about the betrayal. I want to talk about the rebuilding." Because revenge was the fire, but rebuilding, that was the sunrise. Charles's name stayed in headlines for a few weeks, attached to words like embezzlement and termination. Eventually, the noise faded, but my story kept growing, spreading like quiet wildfire. Women started showing up at my bakery not just for cakes and coffee, but for conversation. They called it therapy, with frosting. And I thought, Maybe that's how healing begins. One story, one woman, one truth at a time. But even as my peace grew, I knew there was still one thing left unfinished. One conversation I had to have. One final chapter, waiting for closure. Because when he called again, broken, humbled, and asking to meet, I agreed. When Charles called, I almost didn't answer. His number flashed on my screen like a ghost I'd already buried. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, something in me said, "Finish it." "Lorraine," he said as soon as I picked up, voice low and frayed, "please, I just want to talk." I hesitated, then said, "Talk about what's already done?" "Just one conversation," he begged, face to face. No yelling, no blame, I need to see you. And against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at the same restaurant, the same one where everything fell apart. I chose that intentionally. I wanted to face those ghosts where they were born. When I walked in, the host recognized me immediately. There was a flicker of something, respect, maybe pity in his eyes. "Good evening, Mrs. Parker," he said softly. "Just Lorraine now," I corrected with a smile. "Table for 2?" He nodded and led me to the same corner booth. The same soft jazz played overhead. The same candles flickered gently against the gold-trimmed glasses. But this time, the weight was gone. Charles was already seated. He looked smaller somehow, thinner, older, deflated. The arrogance had drained from him, replaced by a quiet kind of shame that didn't need words. When he saw me, he stood. "You look good." I sat without responding. "Let's not waste each other's time, Charles. You said you wanted to talk." He sank back into his chair. "I owe you an apology." I raised an eyebrow. "You owe me a lot of things. Apologies are just the cheapest." He nodded slowly, accepting the hit. "I know, and I deserve every bit of this. But Lorraine, I need you to know, I wasn't trying to destroy what we had. I just got lost." "Lost?" I repeated softly. "You mean selfish?" He flinched. "Maybe. But when you started your business, when you became everything you are, I felt like I didn't matter anymore, like I was watching you move ahead without me." I studied him for a long moment. "So instead of catching up, you decided to burn the road behind me?" He looked down at his hands. "I thought if I could feel powerful again, I'd stop feeling so small." I leaned back. "And did it work?" He gave a hollow laugh. "No, it ruined me." For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity, the soft, sad kind that comes when you realize the person who hurt you was never really whole to begin with. "You could have told me that," I said. "You could have said, 'Lorraine, I feel invisible.' I would have listened." He shook his head. "You shouldn't have had to fix me." "You're right," I said quietly. "But I tried anyway, and that's the part I'll never forgive myself for. Trying to heal someone who didn't want to stop bleeding." He closed his eyes, and for a second neither of us spoke. The waiter approached, hesitant, recognizing the tension that hung in the air. "Can I get you started with anything?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Just water for me." Charles nodded. "Same." The waiter poured the water, then slipped away like smoke. Charles took a deep breath. "They're pressing charges, Lorraine, the company. And Danielle, she's threatening to sue me." I tilted my head. "For what? False promises?" He gave a bitter chuckle. "Something like that. She wants money I don't have. I might lose everything." "You already did," I said simply. His voice broke. "Do you hate me?" I thought about it, truly thought about it. The long nights, the humiliations, the lies stacked like bricks. Then I said, "No, I don't hate you, Charles. Hate takes energy. I'm done giving you mine." He nodded, eyes glistening. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you were the lesson I needed to learn," I replied softly. The one that taught me love without respect is just slow poison. He reached across the table, his hand trembling. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll think of me and remember something good. I didn't take his hand. I just looked at him, this man who once held my entire world in his palms, and said, I already do, Charles. I remember the day I decided to choose myself. That was the best thing you ever gave me. When the bill came, the waiter hesitated, unsure who to hand it to. I smiled. Put it on mine this time. Consider it closure. Charles looked stunned. After everything, why? Because this time I can afford it, I said, and because I can walk out of here owing you nothing. I signed the check, stood up, and took one last look at him. He was staring at the water glass, shoulders slumped, eyes distant. You know, I said softly, you once told me you married me because I made you feel like you could do anything. The irony is, the moment I stopped believing that about you, I started believing it about myself. He looked up, tears glistening. Goodbye, Lorraine. I nodded. Goodbye, Charles. Outside, the night air was cool and forgiving. The same waiter who'd been there that disastrous night held the door open for me. He gave a small, knowing nod. You did it, he said quietly. I did, I replied, smiling, and this time I really mean it. As I stepped out into the street, I realized something powerful. Closure doesn't always come with revenge or apologies. Sometimes it's just walking away with your head high and your peace intact. That night I didn't cry. I didn't look back. Because there was only one chapter left to write. One final page that belonged entirely to me. There's something poetic about how life comes full circle. How the same restaurant that once saw me humiliated became the stage for my peace. How the same man who once broke me had to sit across from me and witness what strength really looks like when it stops asking for permission. But if people ever ask me when it truly ended, when I finally let go, I tell them it wasn't that night at the restaurant or even when the divorce papers came through. It was the moment the waiter read my note, the moment they panicked. That's when the power shifted. I remember that moment like it's playing on a loop in my mind. Charles was laughing, Danielle was smirking, and I was calm, composed, sipping my wine like the whole world wasn't collapsing around me. When I slipped that folded napkin to the waiter, he looked puzzled, but I smiled in that gentle, reassuring way that makes people listen. Don't worry, I told him softly. Just read it when you're out of sight and do exactly what it says. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I'd already written my goodbye. Inside that note, in my neat cursive handwriting, it said, when I leave this table, charge everything to the card ending in 4301. If it declines, and it will, bring this envelope to the man sitting across from me. Then tell him this, Sir, your wife said it's time you start paying your own bills. Underneath that, I added one final line, and please don't feel sorry for him. He's just learning how it feels to lose something valuable. I'd sealed the envelope with a copy of the bank statement showing his fraudulent transfers, every cent he thought he'd hidden, every lie printed in black and white. So when that poor waiter came back and whispered, Sir, your card has been declined, and handed him that envelope, it wasn't chaos I felt. It was clarity. That was the moment the story stopped being about heartbreak and started being about freedom. After my last meeting with Charles, the final conversation where I left him sitting under those same golden lights, I walked out lighter than I'd felt in years. It was raining softly, that kind of drizzle that blurs city lights into watercolor. I tilted my face to the sky and let it wash over me. When I reached my car, I realized something simple but powerful. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had done its job. It had burned everything unnecessary to ash, leaving only truth behind. And in that truth, there was peace. Months passed. The divorce finalized quietly. I signed the last document in Camille's office, handed back the pen, and felt my chest open like a door finally unlatched. The bakery kept growing. Orders doubled, then tripled. Women came from all over, wanting to meet the calm woman from the viral video. But I never played the victim for them. I didn't need pity. Instead, I told them, "You don't heal by hurting back. You heal by taking back your story." That line became my motto. I even had it painted on the bakery wall. "Take back your story. One cup of coffee at a time." The day that sign went up, the whole place applauded. And in that laughter, in that warmth, I realized I'd built something that had nothing to do with him, and everything to do with me. One afternoon, while I was setting up a new display, a familiar voice broke my focus. "Ms. Parker?" I turned, and there he was, the waiter from that night, still working at the same restaurant apparently, but dressed now in a crisp white shirt and a proud smile. "I wasn't sure if you'd remember me," he said shyly. I laughed. "Of course I do. You handled that night better than most people would have." He smiled. "I just wanted you to know." After that evening, I started thinking about how people let themselves be treated. My girlfriend was in a bad situation back then. Watching you, calm, composed, no shouting, no tears, it made me realize you can walk away with dignity and still win. His voice caught a little. "She left him. We got married last month." My heart warmed. "That's beautiful," I said. "Tell her she's stronger than she knows." He grinned. "She already knows. You taught her." That night, I sat on my porch again, a cup of tea in my hand, the sky painted in streaks of pink and gold, the same porch where I'd once sat crying after the truth first hit. Only now, there were no tears left, just gratitude for the lessons, for the peace, for the woman I became because of the storm I survived. I thought back to the woman in the blue dress, sitting at that restaurant table, holding her dignity together with trembling hands, and I whispered to her, "You made it, baby. You really made it." The world never found out what exactly I told that waiter. People speculated. Some said I cursed Charles under my breath. Others swore I left a secret note for Danielle. But the truth is simpler, quieter, and sharper than that, because when that waiter leaned in and asked, "Is there anything else, ma'am?" I looked him in the eye and said, "Yes, tell him the check's his, and so is the lesson." And then I smiled, finished my wine, and walked out like a woman who already knew the ending. Now, whenever people ask if I regret how it all played out, I tell them this: no, because sometimes you have to lose the man to find the mirror. Sometimes you have to pay the bill to realize you were the investment all along. And sometimes the calmest voice in the room is the one rewriting the story. What I told the waiter made them panic, but what I told myself made me free.